Welcome to Champions Corner, where we have real talk with real caregivers, giving caregivers a voice and helping family caregivers to redefine their normal and not feel so alone on their care journey, featuring the caregiving.com champions. Today, we're going to be talking about when we have to leave our job or career to be a family caregiver. My name is Christina Keys. I'm one of your hosts. I was a caregiver for my mother who had a stroke and also my ex-boyfriend who had a stroke.
Hi, my name is Carlos Olivas, and I care for my dad living with Alzheimer's dementia.
Hi, my name is Felicia Phillips. I was a caregiver for my father who had Parkinson's and Parkinson's-related dementia, and I currently care for my mother who has Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, and a host of other chronic conditions.
Hi, my name is Dr. Phelan Lewis, and I care for my mother who's experienced a stroke.
Hi, my name is Michelle Magner, and I cared for my mother-in-law who lived with frontotemporal dementia and my father-in-law who lived with cancer.
Thank you all so much for joining us today and being on our panel of caregiving.com champions. We're going to go ahead and let Felicia start us off today.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about our careers. And the first topic that we're going to address is at what point you realize that you're going to have to leave your full-time job, your full-time career in order to dedicate more time to caregiving. I'm going to kick it off and I'm going to pass it on to some of our champions so that we can find out their story. For me, I started caregiving in 2017. And it was a rough year. I was 4 months into a brand new job in a brand new position where, I had the blessing of being able to create it and, figure out what that position would look like. And at the same time, I had assumed caregiving, and every doctor's appointment, I found a new diagnosis. I thought my mother just had type 2 diabetes, and it turned out that she had everything else too. And so I did that for a year or two, and my husband and I were talking like we need a plan. This is not working. And so in 2019, not only did I leave my full-time career, but we also relocated to a new state because we decided to move my parents in the home with me and integrate our homes. And I stopped working at that time during the transition, but wasn't sure if I would be able to go back into the workforce because of how my parents were progressing. So that was 2019. And I have not had a full-time job since that time. So that's just a little bit of my story, and you'll hear more as we progress through today's episode. So now I'm going to pass it along to one of our champions. Let's talk to Dr. Phelan. Tell us, when did you realize that you were going to have to walk away from your career full-time?
So for me, I realized that I needed to stop my full-time job as a research director for a national NGO. When I realized that working full-time, being my mother's caregiver full-time in the home, was absolutely breaking me. It was when I realized that my mental health was completely suffering. And I knew, like that cliched phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup. I knew that was real for me. That was applicable. I was, in terms of my mother's caregiving, I was helping to arrange her in-home physical therapist, occupational therapist, speech therapist, her in-home nurse that would come visit her. And this was all happening every single day, 5 days a week, while also having a C-suite job and my first C-suite job in my professional career. So everything felt like it was on fire. I was exhausted. I was hardly sleeping at night. And I was truly suffering. I was truly breaking. And I needed to really prioritize my well-being, myself, to make sure that I, honestly, to be frank, could stay here in this world, to stay as a beautiful human here on this earth. And that was a very hard decision, but I had to do it to make sure that I could survive and continue to make it through.
Thank you so much for sharing. So many of us have dealt with that whole issue of just trying to be healthy and to be whole and to make sure that we're taken care of, but also have space to care for our loved ones. So I'm going to pass this on now to Michelle. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey as far as full-time work in caregiving?
I was working full-time in senior living. I worked in a skilled nursing facility, and I was there during the pandemic. So it was at the height of stress, and my nervous system was just shot. We had actually gone outside to take a team picture and had to take off our masks because we had won an award for just like a moment. And literally this side of my face couldn't smile. And my father-in-law had been undergoing radiation treatments for his cancer. The cancer had spread to his brain. So I was one of his rides to and from treatments. And I just realized I had hit this bandwidth capacity that I could no longer show up for my residents and team and their families the way I wanted to, and simultaneously be helping my mother in law who lived in an assisted living memory care, and then also be assisting my father in law with his treatment. And his prognosis was not great. When I left my job in January, he actually passed away 5 weeks later. And then a year later, my mother-in-law passed away. So honestly, leaving my full-time position while it was my dream job has been incredibly it was heart-wrenching for me to leave. And I feel like it was a little divinely supported, because it allowed me to be really present with my father-in-law in his final weeks, and then be very available to my mother-in-law, because he had been in the same building as she was. So he was able to go down the hall every day to see her. And after he was gone, leaving work had given me the space to be able to visit her more frequently.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think that we're going to hear some common themes. It's a very difficult time. Some of us are leaving, dream jobs. We love our job, everything about it. Life is going exactly the way we want it. We're going to hear from Christina, and I know she was really happy with where she was, and then caregiving hit. So in fact, Christina, why don't you tell us a little bit about that now?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was in tech and sales and marketing. I had been in that industry for quite a while, many, many years, well over a decade. I was very good at it, constantly winning awards, usually one of the top 3 people in the company, making almost $100,000 a year. And then in 2013, my mother had her life-changing stroke, and I became her family caregiver. And I tried to continue to do that until 2017. Well, working a 9-to-5 job Monday through Friday is not conducive to being a primary caregiver. Even though I had people caring for my mother during the day, there were a lot of hospital visits or a lot of doctor's visits. So by the time February of 2017 came, we got new vacation time in January. And by February of 2017, I had used all 2 weeks of my vacation and all 5 of my sick days, just taking mom to doctors, taking mom to hospital visits. And I knew it was time to take a leave of absence. And I remember I didn't want to leave. I really enjoyed the career I had made for myself. I really enjoyed having a very steady income. And frankly, that income was paying for my mother's care, because as we know, insurance doesn't pay for care inside the home. And so I gave a month's notice. And I remember that last day, most of the time on your last day, when you're leaving a company, you kind of, slack off. My last day, I stayed, we got off at 5. I stayed until 6, like feverishly entering stuff into Salesforce, just because I didn't want to leave. And here comes the management team and the CEO, and they're like, Christina, what are you still doing here? And they're like, you can go home. And I'm like, okay. And I got in that elevator, and that was literally the longest elevator ride of my life, because I got in that elevator and I got in as Christina, the career woman. And when those doors opened, I was Christina, the caregiver, and I was completely lost. I had no idea what to do. And so, yeah, it was pretty traumatic. Not only was I losing my income, I was losing my insurance. So I couldn't take care of myself and my health needs. And I was going in to be doing something I had no idea what to do full time. How do I save my mom's life is what was going on in my head. So,
wow. Yeah, I mean, you just reminded me of the days of, that period where I was still working full time, and all of my vacation time, all of my sick time was being used for my parents. And so I think that many of us find that space where then it's like, well, what do we do for ourselves? Or, can I now go on vacation? Well, I could have, but now I can't, because I used every single vacation day for every single sick day in order to care for my loved one. And then, we think we'll take a leave. I remember years ago, my mother taking a leave of absence from social work because she was a caregiver for my grandmother who had Alzheimer's. And she took the leave of absence and did everything that she could to be in position to not have to leave full-time work. But guess what? When she went back to work, it didn't change. It was still far too much to try to do full-time while also caring for someone with Alzheimer's. And so my mother, who I'm now a caregiver for, had to leave her job. She had to leave work. So it is something that we all deal with, losing income, losing our livelihood, losing some of our independence, losing control. And so, Carlos, why don't you tell us a little bit about what your experience has been in this realm?
Thanks. I resonate with everybody that's talked about leaving a career because I had to do the same thing. In 2016, or actually 2015, my dad was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, and I began a plan to move back home, start supervising my dad's health. So I left a career in live event support, doing concerts, weddings, conferences, seeing the world, having fun, working long days, and enjoying this path I was on. When I moved back home, I had to find something to do to support myself, to keep up with my responsibilities and obligations. So I drove for Uber and Lyft and did TaskRabbit, freelanced a little bit here and there, but it wasn't supporting me the way I needed to. I was going through some financial challenges that I didn't expect. I was trying to adapt, living rent-free here, but still trying to support my dad, going through the emotional roller coaster ride that was tugging at my heart, pulling at those emotions, and setting me into a spiral. When you're affected by a financial challenge, you get unbalanced. So that brings up to the next question. Were you financially prepared to leave your job to become a full-time caregiver? And I would say no. I was not prepared for that. So let me ask, Michelle, were you prepared to become a full-time caregiver in a financial way?
I think a couple of things are coming to mind. Firstly, I wanted to take FMLA, and you cannot get that program if it's your in-laws. At least at the time, that was the case. So had I been able to take FMLA, I feel like there would have been a better opportunity for me to have stayed in the workforce in senior living, which is a space we know that we need team members. I did feel financially supported because my husband is our primary breadwinner. That being said, when we lost my income, we had to readdress our goals and budget because we lost my income. So while I did have that financial support, things have since changed with his job, which you can never anticipate. Like, we're operating at the speed of information. We're making decisions based on what we know today. And I'm not sure if we knew then what we knew now, what we know now, potentially we would have made a different decision. I'm not sure the path we would have taken. So it's kind of a roundabout answer. Wish I would have had FMLA as an option. And while I was supported, some things changed pretty quickly as soon as I left, and there has been some strain.
Yeah, I can kind of resonate with FML and how it would be helpful in my case. But as a freelancer in my industry, there is no type of resource like that, because you're pretty much go all the time. Rock and roll is fast, furious, and has a lot of bang to it. So I want to pass on to the next person. Felicia.
Sure. So for me, the quick answer is, was I financially prepared for caregiving? And I would say no. And not just no as far as day to day paying bills and such, but when you count the cost for caregiving, I stopped working full time in 2019. It is now 2024. I had a retirement plan. I had a 401k that I was contributing to, right, at that time. And now I'm caregiving. And so I don't have that loss of health insurance, right? Because we're working full time, we have health insurance. You come out of that. And so I found myself taking my parents to the doctors and realizing I did not have the privilege of being able to then go to the doctors myself. And so the good thing for me was that my parents in the earlier stages, and my mom still now can still make some decisions, but we were able to talk through some things. So we made that joint decision about the move to Georgia. And I told them at that time, if I'm going to help you, I'm going to need some help helping you. And so to be very frank, my husband at the time that we moved had been laid off. So it made it easier to shift, right? Because he wasn't actively working. And then I had to leave my job and we moved to Atlanta, Atlanta area, and knew that my parents were there and they were financially stable, and so it gave us some space to be able to find employment. Of course, I realized very quickly that I couldn't do anything full time. I couldn't do anything that was going to cause me to have to leave the home, but it gave us some cushion as far as the transition, so that my husband could find full time work. But again, we weren't really prepared for what that would look like long term. Exhausting a 401k, which we have. And I know some of you on here have as well, not having savings, not having insurance, not having health insurance, not having the lifestyle that you were accustomed to. And so it has been a challenge. It was a challenge. There are still challenges. It is just very impactful in more ways than you might imagine, beyond just, I'm not going to get a regular paycheck for the next year or 2 or 7 or 10 or however long this journey lasts for you.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. Not having a fully funded retirement, a lifestyle change, those are ongoing, and you have to adapt as you go, as you progress through this journey. I want to talk to Dr. Phelan. Were you prepared? Tell us a bit more.
Absolutely not. And I'm laughing only because it's so starkly, so much so not prepared. I don't want to make assumptions for those of us here on the call, but I will at least speak for myself in that I started caregiving when I was very young. So I started at age 11, and that is a caregiving experience that I've had throughout my life, along with my older brother. So all of these things about 401ks and assets and savings, I didn't have any of that. I was a student most of my life and had finished up my PhD, and my mother had a stroke in the middle of the pandemic. And I had to literally at 5 a.m. To catch the quickest flight out from London to get to Nashville and be there for my mother at her bedside. And that is when a more intensive caregiving journey for me started. And I had to get rid of my apartment in England and all of my belongings and ship some stuff back and all of that to say, as a student, I was poor and had no savings whatsoever. So, and I recognize for other younger age caregivers listening to our podcast, they may also identify with that. As when you think of young adults and millennials who are caregivers, we may not have those years and years of working behind us where we even have any savings to rely on, and certainly not a retirement plan. I've not been working long enough to pay into one. So when I was really fortunate, when I did move back to Nashville, and I was able to get that first C-suite dream job, I, as I mentioned, I wasn't able to work it very long. I had to resign after being there about 2 months because of the caregiving responsibilities. It was way too intense for me. My mental health was suffering, and my physical health was suffering indeed. So all of that to say, financially, absolutely not. I had nothing to fall back on. I wasn't working long enough to even have savings. that I could lean on. But honestly and truly, I had to quit working to save myself. And I had to prioritize my own livelihood, my own well-being, so that I could stay here. And then, of course, be able to be someone who can be the support to my mother. So again, any other younger age caregivers out there, I hear you, I see you, I understand that we may be different than the baby boomer population or the generation above us, and that we may not have that to lean back on. So I really understand the struggle that it is, particularly for us who are younger.
I can also relate to having to pick up and move and getting rid of the stuff that you acquired, and then your physical and mental health suffering from it. So it's a lot. Christina, how about you? How were you prepared?
Absolutely not. I remember when my mom was in the hospital, everybody who came in, I asked questions, and I knew I was tired, and I would even ask, can I record the answer? Because I wanted to be prepared, right? And nobody once said, hey, by the way, in-home care is not going to be covered by insurance, right? And my mother was very successful in aerospace. I had a good career, and literally within less than 2 years, we went through both her 401k and my 401k, almost $300,000, spending that on everything that insurance didn't cover. So it was a very odd transition for me to go from being, pretty much upper middle class to poverty level. And I had to, learn to do things like, first of all, I didn't know that I could get medical insurance. So I went for 2 years without any medical insurance. And my last doctor's appointment that I had with medical insurance at my old company, the doctors told me that I had maybe 6 months to live because my body was literally shutting down from the stress of caregiving. I was only sleeping 5 to 10 hours a week. I'd gained 100 pounds. I'd got diabetes, high blood pressure, all of this stuff. And because I wasn't working, I didn't have any insurance. And I had to learn how to do things like walk into a food bank when we used to donate to food banks. I had to learn how to do things like, in order to get money, I had to give plasma. I had to sell all the nice things I had acquired, because if I wanted to do any work or if I wanted to pay my rent, because I did not live with my mother, I needed to sell those things, right? And that stress of that, it's interesting because I look back at those pictures, in 2017, 2018, and I swear to God, I look older than I do now. Just the stress of trying to figure out, people talk about living paycheck to paycheck, but I think many of us caregivers, we live day to day. We literally don't know how we're going to make things happen, and we have to make choices. Even when those copays come in, or when, mom needs a new wheelchair, or all of a sudden her hospital bed doesn't work and we've already got that one piece of equipment, we have to make choices like, which bill is it going to be? The electric bill we're not going to pay this month, or is it, going to be the water bill? And how much longer can we go without them turning it off? All because we have to care for the person, we love the person we're caring for. So yeah, I was absolutely not prepared. So that kind of brings me to our next question. When I did start working again, right? Obviously, a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday job was not going to be available to me. I just couldn't do it because mom, my care responsibility. So I had to get something more flexible. So, I went from making almost $100,000 a year to $15 an hour part-time, right? And I wound up, at any time doing 5 part-time jobs, contract positions here and there. Again, selling my stuff, donating plasma. And it was interesting because in the middle of all that, that's when I created, the nonprofit, Loving Them Forward. And, I spent from 2017 until 2020 just kind of piecing together everything I could, any way I could make money, here and there. I mean, I would have mowed somebody's lawn if I had a lawnmower, whatever I needed to do, right? And I didn't want to have a gap in my resume, right? I didn't want to have a gap in my resume. So I needed to pay for care for my mother still. So I could still work even if it was part-time. So I was paying, not only trying to keep a roof over my head, but $1,500 to $3,000 a month for my mother's care, just so I could not have a gap in my resume. So when I did go back to work, I was able to find something. And, it took me a long time to finally decide if I'm doing 5 part-time jobs, maybe I should look for something that is a company that's more conducive to caregiving, that is a remote job and lets us work flexible hours. And actually, let's go ahead and hear from Alicia. What's your story on that? When you had to start working again, what did you do to create something that you could support yourself?
Sure. So it's so funny because I'm an entrepreneur now. And there's so many times that we probably all look back on our caregiving journey and think, I wish I'd done things differently, or, I wish this wasn't the scenario. But what I can say is that the blessing of caregiving, in addition to being able to provide care for the ones that we love, for me was that it forced me into entrepreneurship. Because I was quite content, like many of you. I had my 6-figure job. I was happy. I had the house, the husband, the car, the kids, the dog, the vacations. Like I was doing all of that. And then caregiving sort of slowly stripped those things away from me. And so in 2020, during the pandemic, I actually launched a company, the Fab to Fit Academy, which is a virtual space for nutritional coaching and personal training. And I was able to do that online. And it's so funny because it wasn't really because of COVID. I did it online because no overhead, right? I didn't have money for a gym and all of those things. And so I was just being really creative with how can I service clients? How can I help them to lose weight, to reverse diabetes, to manage their health and all of those things in an online space. And so I launched the Fab to Fit Academy. And that was going pretty well. However, as my parents' care needs began to increase, I was finding at that time, I was actually doing classes like regular, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, different times. And it was just me. And I was finding that as my parents were needing more care, I was being stressed out now with my own business. So now I'm not in corporate America. I'm not worried about, checking in and clocking in and all of that with a boss. But now I'm in a place where I'm having trouble servicing my clients. And so about 2 years ago, I actually had to reduce some of the services offered through the academy, which was another hit financially. And then from there, I actually started working in financial services. And so my only regret about financial services is that I did not find out about it sooner, because it does allow me the time freedom to continue to care for my mother, to care for my father when he was still here. It gives me the ability to make the income that I was accustomed to making and more, and I can really do it from anywhere. And so that has been a blessing because, as caregivers, we need flexibility. We need to be able to, this week has been a little stressful because I'm out of town. I'm away at a conference. And my mother had 2 doctor's appointments. So Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I'm trying to get ready to leave, to prepare everything I need to do to be able to leave her with my daughter for 4 days. But then she has these long doctor's appointments. She had a psych eval, a neuropsych eval, because we hadn't established her care for Alzheimer's and dementia in Georgia. And then she also had an eye appointment. So, when you're thinking of trying to get things done before you go away, it was all of that. And it was just a lot. But again, the blessing is that it's flexible. So I can block out my calendar and say, hey, I have doctor's appointments this morning. I'm only going to do evening appointments and such. So that's been a real blessing for me. And it also allows me to have a team. So, when my father was getting when my father was basically dying, October, November, December, and we had to rush to the ER, rush to these appointments, I was able to just call my team and say, hey, I have a 6:00 appointment. Can you handle that for me? Hey, I'm supposed to be training somebody at 7:00. Can you handle that for me? So the financial services world, Global Financial Impact is my current company, has just been an absolute blessing in that way to really allow me to kind of get back to where I had been pre-caregiving. It's still a challenge because I'm still learning. I'm still in training. Again, I'm away right now for 3 or 4 days at a conference learning and training. And it does take a lot to prepare to leave. And then you come back and you have to jump right back into it. But it really has been a blessing for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we're going to go to Michelle now.
Well, I think something else that needs to be threaded through when we're talking about our careers and leaving dream jobs and looking at what's next is grief. That there's a lot of grief that's playing out when you're grieving what you thought your life was going to be or where you thought you were headed in your life or career. And for me, we had my father-in-law pass away 5 weeks after I left my job. So immediately, while trying to ramp up my caregiving for my mother-in-law, I am just struck with grief. So as I have looked to get back into the workforce, I actually created a company. The entrepreneur bug caught me too. And so I have been really working to leverage my own caregiving experience. I'm working on a PhD in gerontology. I have a master's certification in gerontology, and I'm a certified dementia practitioner. So I'm taking the education and family experience that I've had mixed with my 7 years in senior living to support families who are on this journey as well. And I've immediately started speaking. So like my first year wanting to really get back into work, I made like $800 with speaking gigs just around town, sharing my story, talking about aging and aging mindset. And it's an evolution. There's an upward trajectory of it, but I'm not near to replacing my income. So it's a work in progress, and I'm really committed to it because I think that this is a huge gap in services, how families are being supported along the way. We've all shared various stages of what we've had to manage for our family members. And the focus is so often on the senior, on our family member. And so the family who are having to make decisions, make those sacrifices, are just needing more support. So I'm hoping to continue to provide those services. The runway is getting a little bit shorter on how long before I maybe need to look at something back in the corporate world, but I'm very optimistic about how I can support families in that way.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for bringing up the grief. It's interesting you mentioned that. It's like I talked about being in that elevator, taking the longest elevator ride of my life. And I remember I had, when I went to that doctor's appointment, that last doctor's appointment, I walked up to the window and, I thought I'd never miss a cubicle again because we all hate cubicles. But I walked up and the lady's sitting at her desk and she had her computer and she's typing and she had her family. And I started crying because I thought I'm never going to have that again, and it's very interesting to experience that and really just have that identity, my identity be lost, right? Who was I? Because I didn't know, right? So let's go to Dr. Phelan.
So I had about 6 months of unemployment. So after I resigned from my dream job, C-suite job, I had 6 months of trying to then restore myself, take care of me, and also continue to take care of my mother. I got on food stamps. As Christina had mentioned, I had a number of negative physical health impacts for myself as a result of caregiving. And I didn't have health insurance. So I had to go to indigent care to get seen for, like muscle strains and issues with my knees, things that happened as a result of having a very physical job of taking care of my mom and doing lifting and all that type of things that my body was not used to doing before as a student. And that was definitely humbling to go from having, that dream job to now, okay, I am relying on social services, but I'm also grateful for that time in my life because it also gives me a very, more of an understanding of what are particularly most vulnerable caregivers in our society, what they're going through when, there simply is just a lack of support, formal support in place for us. But I also am proud of myself for that 6 months. I think it's hard to walk away from something that you love and something that you feel you worked very, very hard for to finally achieve. But I'm proud of myself for that because I needed to take care of myself. So in that 6 months, I didn't work, focused on trying to sleep and trying to eat and maybe take a walk in the neighborhood if I could manage that during the day. and again, just restore my own well-being. But for me, I had to resume job searching about 6 months. That was kind of the time of like, I've got nothing left. I've got to, necessity calls for it, for me to get back into the paid workforce. And I did a lot of job searching, probably have done hundreds of resume submissions and all of that. And for me, the job that ended up working out, it was not the C-suite job. It was definitely a significant pay cut from what I was doing before, but it was a job that I'm very grateful for. It had me working as a program manager with children, and that allowed me to have the flexibility to be able to be home when my mother had her speech, occupational, physical therapist, home health nurse, all those visits that were happening 5 days a week at home, and be able to be in charge of my own schedule and have some autonomy that way. I had a very understanding employer. I'm very grateful for that. I'm someone who had family caregiving responsibilities herself, so she understood what it was like as a parent, what I was going through caring for my parent. And I also would say then just creating boundaries. That was also something that I learned. So having to be forthcoming to my employer to say, I can't work on that day because I need to take my mother to this doctor's appointment, or I've got to take her to her outside physical therapy. So having to be more forthcoming with my own personal life, which I wasn't used to doing and sometimes felt uncomfortable doing. But that was a necessity to make working, which was something I had to do to get bills paid, something that I had to resume. But I also can say I definitely relate to all the rest of you in terms of selling things like plasma or doing psych experiments for extra cash. Like definitely we're hustling in that way to find any little bit of cash I could to tie my family over during that time.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about, not really mentioning a lot of stuff to your employer until, a while later. And I did not want my company to know. I was very quiet about that because I didn't want, I didn't want them to treat me different, but I also didn't want to be on the radar when they were, letting people go. When you're in sales and marketing, when you're on a huge team, they're easy turnovers. There's a lot of turnover, and doesn't matter how good you are. If you're a problem, they're going to let you go. Right. So I didn't bring it up. And I remember, I didn't have anybody on my social media connected to work or anything. And we had to do a GoFundMe because we had got to the point to where we couldn't even afford adult briefs for my mother. We were dying financially, right? And so it was a very humiliating moment, but we had to do a GoFundMe. And somehow, some way, one of my customers from New York saw it. And he called me up and he was like, Christina, what's going on here? And he said, I had no idea you were going through this. And he called my CEO. And he said, do you know what one of your employees is going through? And actually, my CEO and my managers were more compassionate than I thought they were going to be. And it's interesting. I think these days, people are a little bit more compassionate to what goes on at home. So it is okay to speak up. I'm just glad that we don't have to talk about it constantly, but it is okay to speak up at our job, right? So Carlos, I think we're going to hear from you now.
This is a good question. Because what did I have to do? I had to change this whole lifestyle. It's all about adapting. Moving, going from full-time job and coming back to supervised by dad, and then working little side jobs in the gig economy. One thing that really kind of kept me connected is my network of people. Through TaskRabbit, I met this gentleman, entrepreneur in the cannabis industry. And he calls me up one day during the pandemic and says, hey, I need some help. Can you come over? So I was able to link up with him, eventually getting a part-time job in the cannabis industry with my skill set. My skill set enabled me to adapt into their climate control systems, the watering, the lighting, all that stuff was similar to what I was doing before. So I was able to adapt and integrate into this role that allowed me to earn some income, keep me away from the strife that's going on at home with my dad, because I was worried, enabled me to have some independence, some normalcy. So I kind of relate to everybody that's gone through stuff. I mean, I've sold plasma. I've had to sit here and kind of be bored at what's going to happen. How am I going to live my life and make it worthwhile on top of caregiving? It's a hard journey. It does toy with you.
It is. And it's really important. And I think that's really what this whole podcast series is about redefining normal. We have to, as family caregivers, not hold ourselves to the same standards we had before. Like, I think we have this whole thing about chasing the American dream, having the 401k, going to vacations, buying the house or whatever. And it's just not something we're going to be able, we got to put that on hold for a minute when we're caregiving. Right. And we also have to, redefine normal. A lot of times our normal becomes learning how to live in poverty while we're caring for our loved one, right? And so I think I heard a lot of you guys talk about some of the things that you tapped into in the community, and that makes me think about, traditionally people talk about resources for family caregivers as in home care and senior living and things like that. And they don't talk about things like a food bank being a resource, a lending closet where you can get medical equipment for free. You know what I mean? Different things like that are going to save us money, or, housing assistance. These are things that, we're going to need to tap into as family caregivers. Insurance, it's not tied to our company. These are things we're going to need to know about when our financial situation changes because we're caring for a loved one, right? So, and we'll be talking about that in our next episode. But before we take off, let's hear from each of you guys. Just a couple quick things that you would like to share with fellow caregivers out there who are walking through the same thing. Some advice when they have to leave their career to care for a loved one. And we'll start with Carlos.
I would say start with a plan. I came into caregiving without a plan, and it really hurt my momentum. The best way to do that is to write it down, understand your responsibilities, obligations, live within your means, and revisit your financial outlook and see what you can plan for and overcome those challenges that arise.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Carlos. How about we go to Michelle next?
I would say for people who are looking to re-enter the workforce is, again, you're operating at the speed of information. And I believe genuinely, and there's just a universal support for your life journey. When I was home with our children for 12 years, that's when I started caregiving for my grandmothers, actually before my in-laws, and was trying to re-enter the workforce. I felt like I could not get a job because I was overeducated and underqualified. And I ultimately ended up in my dream job after staying home for 12 years with raising children and caregiving for my grandmothers, which led me to help my in-laws during that time. So I would just say, remember that there's a bigger picture and a greater path that sometimes we're not privy to. And one thing tends to lead to another. So be patient and be kind to yourself.
Okay. And let's go ahead and go to Dr. Faye Lynn next.
I really want to speak to the millennials and Generation Z who are listening to our call today, and really encourage you. I see you. I know that when we're talking about C-suite jobs, 401ks, mortgages, those would be things that feel very unattainable to us. And particularly if you're also then as engaged as a family caregiver like we are. So first, I want to make sure that I acknowledge you, I see you, and it's okay. Do not feel that there's something wrong with you, that you're behind. Thankfully, our young age works in our favor. We have many, many years to get to our dream jobs and to work. So do not feel that you're being left behind. The second quick thing that I would say, and that's for any caregiver of any age, is to truly prioritize your mental health. If you are struggling with thoughts of self-harm or anxiety that keeps you up all night long, like such as that I experience, do know that you are worthy of taking care of yourself first. It is truly true that you could not pour from an empty cup. So you have to find ways to restore yourself and protect your peace and well-being as you go on your caregiving journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Phelan. And let's go to Felicia and next.
And I have just been racking my brain trying to figure out the answer to this question. What I will say is that, when I hear Carlos talk about having a plan, right? What comes to mind is, at what point do you do that? Right? Listening to Dr. Phelan, who was a caregiver as a very young person, she wasn't thinking about being a caregiver. It was just thrust upon her. And so what I would say is that we all need to think about whether you're currently caregiving or not. At some point, it is highly possible that you will either have to prepare or have to give care for someone, or you're going to have to receive care. And so what I would suggest is that you find a trusted community of support, but also trusted community of ideas. We've heard all kinds of ideas just during this past hour of what we've done, from donating plasma to gig jobs to starting your own business. So many things that are possible that probably seem really impossible when you're in that hopeless position. So when you can surround yourself, not with your family and friends who really don't understand what caregiving looks like, feels like, tastes like, any of that, but a trusted community of people who are going through what you're going through to gather ideas. And then as much as you can, like Carlos says, go ahead and plan things like long-term care, right? Things like, and I hesitated in sharing this because I'm not trying to put in a shameless plug, but I just found out about a company that offers living benefits for people with Alzheimer's. You can get up to $1.5 million in care for someone, or in advanced death benefit for someone that has Alzheimer's. Well, my mother was diagnosed in 2017. Imagine what my life would have been like, what my husband's life would have been like, how our lives would have changed if I had been able to go and access a living benefit that would give me $1.5 million to contribute to the care of my mother, right? So those are things that people don't know about, that we're not necessarily talking about, but when you're in communities like that, you get the resources and you get the information.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, and it's like you mentioned, Felicia, really getting connected in your community. And if you're not connected in your community, if we haven't come there and built community yet, look on social media, search the word caregiver for caregiver groups. Find out what some of those other people are doing, because you might listen to this podcast today and you might have a time where you have to go in the hospital and now your brain is not working correctly because you haven't slept for a week. Tap into those caregiver groups, get connected with a caregiver group. There are many of them on Zoom. And if you don't know about any support groups, that is a perfect opportunity for you to join us for the next episode, where we're going to be talking about finding support groups, finding local resources in your area. I think the biggest thing for me that I would say is try to be kind to yourself. Like with my mother, she had a stroke. She was paralyzed on one side. We had to change the way we did everything. We had to change the way we did everything. And our lives as caregivers changed. And try to not shame yourself on that, right? It's different. Remember that the changes you're making, you're doing them because you love somebody, because you stepped up and you did something absolutely selfless. And there's no shame in that. So really, be kind to yourself through this process. And we know it's not easy, but we also know, we hope you don't have to do it alone. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Champions Corner, Real Talk with Real Caregivers. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss any of our episodes. Like our next episode, I mentioned finding local resources and support. Make sure you like and follow us on caregiving.com and all of our social media channels. And if you want to apply to be a caregiving.com champion so you can be a part of the change, you can go to caregiving.com and look to apply there, or you can simply text champion to 360-230-7736. See you next episode. Bye.
Bye-bye.